Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for WallStreetWindow.com. Mike Swanson is a successful former hedge fund manager who provides his subscribers with a very real window into his investments, updating them on every move he makes in the markets. Right now, Mike's anticipating a bear and is dumping all his stocks while the getting is good, investing instead in gold and the commodities. Protect your assets and learn the wise ways of the markets. WallStreetWindow.com. And check out Mike Swanson's great contribution to the history of the rise of the American empire and the war state. Available at scotthorton.org/Amazon. All right, y'all. Welcome back to the show. Our next guest is a former speechwriter for Richard Nixon and for Ronald Reagan, and I don't know all the different positions that he's had. You know him from the McLaughlin Group, and of course his column at original.antiwar.com/Pat. And I think it's patrickjbuchanan.com as well. You can oftentimes read him at lewrockwell.com. Political commentator Pat Buchanan. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Doing fine, Scott.
Good. Very happy to have you here. And I'll be interested to hear your take on this Ukraine Russia crisis going on here. You're a reliable right-wing old cold warrior, so I'm sure you're going to have some really harsh things to say about the Russians here and how they're out of line and how America needs to put them back in line, right? Nobody could possibly be as hard on the Russians as Pat Buchanan, so let him have it.
Well, the Soviets and the Bolsheviks are different than Russians, in my judgment, and what we have here in Crimea, for example, I think is simply a preemptive move by Vladimir Putin, who saw his political, diplomatic, and economic interests suddenly evaporate in Kiev, make a preemptive move to make sure he did not lose his security interests in the Black Sea. And the Crimea, of course, is the base of the Black Sea Fleet of Russia, the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, and it's belonged to Russia, or was controlled by Russia, for some 200 years. And what he did is not at all irrational. It's quite what great powers do. And I know the Wall Street Journal called it a blitzkrieg, but as of thus far, I haven't seen lots of soldiers slaughtered.
Yeah, I saw some warning shots fired, but I don't know if there's even been reports of any killed, although I guess that could happen at any time if you have opposing armies nearby. But it was more or less a peaceful invasion, such as it was.
Right. They've got about, I think, 10,000 troops who are stationed on the Crimea, on the peninsula there, and they may have added more, and they're not under Russian insignia, and they've kept those off. And it has been a peaceful but forceful takeover, undeniably. But, Scott, look at the strategic situation. What strategic vital interest of the United States has been put at risk today? There's not a single new Russian ship in the port at Sebastopol. There is no greater threat than there was yesterday to any U.S. interest whatsoever. I think the U.S. The threat to the vital U.S. interest is absolutely zero.
Mm-hmm. Well, but what was the real threat to Russian interests in Crimea? You think the new government that, their basing rights there were really in question, for example?
Yeah, I do. I think the new government, I would be very leery if I were Putin, taking a look at a government which was replaced the duly elected legitimate government, incompetent and corrupt as it might have been, but it was replaced by people who were clearly anti-Russia, pro-West, and some of them understandably anti-Russian, because many of those areas in the western Ukraine and the central Ukraine suffered horribly in the Holodomor, the forced starvation and collectivization in 1932 and 33, which Kaganovich did for Stalin. So I understand that sentiment, but Putin looked over there and he sees these elements, and he says they're taking over the Ukraine, they're moving it out of our sphere of interest, and it's just a matter of a short time before they tell us they're canceling our lease on the Sebastopol naval base. So why don't we get in there and take control of that and make sure we have that? And so we bargain from a position of strength. So that's my belief as to what he's doing, Scott. And I will be surprised, and I think Putin will be taking a far graver risk if he moves troops into eastern Ukraine, basically the mainland of Ukraine and eastern Ukraine.
Now, well, I wonder what you think the chances of that are. It seems to me, and I'm an amateur at this compared to you for sure, but it seemed like the reason he had his soldiers, because they're clearly Russian soldiers, right? He had them tear their flags off their their jackets. Because he wants to be able to pretend when he withdraws them later that, oh, that was just a local pro-Russian militia, so that he can save a little bit of face. He makes his statement, but he doesn't have to lose too much face in softening his position back again.
Well, right, and as we mentioned earlier, when the German army went into Poland, it didn't tear its insignias off. And I think what he wants to hear is, I think he's got a bargaining position that's fairly strong right now, but at the same time, he's got a problem on his own hands from this. This is why I think it's so silly to talk about any military operation on the part of the United States. As I say, we've got no vital interest there, no NATO ally, no commitment to use force at all. That I think that he is basically, he's lost Ukraine, he's lost an enormous asset, a strategic asset of Russia, I think, in his own backyard. And I think he realizes that. And there's no reason why we should go to war over something like that.
Yeah. Well, it's incredible. I'm looking at antiwar.com/blog right now, and John Glazer has this YouGov poll where 14% of Americans answered that the U.S. has, quote, any responsibility to get involved in Ukraine. Never mind how involved we already are. But it's interesting to compare that to the tone of voice of every single person on every single cable TV news channel all day long on each and every one of them, other than that one Stephen Cohen from The Nation they interview from time to time on CNN. Otherwise, it's 100% unanimous. And apparently we're all... The media wants us to believe that we all are with them on this, but doesn't seem to be working, Pat.
Yeah, and quite frankly, why is this America's responsibility? We are not only on the other side of the Black Sea, we're on the other side of the Mediterranean, and we're on the other side of the Atlantic. Now, with the British Empire in 1853 to 1856, they did fight in Crimea. They did fight at Balaclava. That's where the charge of the Light Brigade took place that Lord Tennyson wrote up so magnificently. But that has not ever been in any vital interest of the United States. Scott, take a look at the Cold War. Ike didn't do anything at the time of the Hungarian Revolution, which was in Central Europe. Reagan did what? When Solidarity was shut down on Moscow's orders, some of us said, please put the Warsaw regime in default. He refused to do it because the White House told me this will sink the German banks. Yet Kennedy just went to Berlin and gave a speech when they built the wall. I was with Richard Nixon in '68 in his apartment when he talked to Lyndon Johnson during the invasion of Czechoslovakia by the Warsaw Pact and 250,000 troops. LBJ said, cut me some slack. And Nixon didn't come down on him with both feet because both of them knew we're not going to do anything militarily. In other words, during the Cold War, when we faced, I believe, a genuine strategic and civilizational threat, some of the strongest presidents in Cold War history said America's vital interests stop at the Elbe River, not on the Dnieper River.
Right. Well, and there really was no question in the 1980s that if it had come to it, like in the TV movie, where the Russians really were driving all their tank divisions into Western Europe, Reagan would have gone to war over that. But that's how many miles west of where we're talking about?
Well, there are thousands of miles. And that's what gets me, as I noted in my column. People, these editorial writers are saying it's in the heart of Europe, okay? Now, wait a minute.
The heart of Eurasia, maybe. It's a big continent.
It's east of what we used to call Eastern Europe.
Oh, man. Well, and for some of the younger listeners, could you describe very briefly the difference between the USSR and the Russian government today? And I don't just mean that they have a freer media and elections and that kind of thing, but in terms of the size and the power.
Sure. Strategically, the Soviet Union, the USSR, after World War II, was the center of an empire that included 10 colonies in Central and Eastern Europe. You've got Poland and Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Romania, Bulgaria, East Germany, Czechoslovakia. All of these were satellite states, and this part of Central Europe hosted 400,000 Soviet troops and tank armies. We had 300,000 men on the other side of the Elbe River. In Germany, we had them in Norway, we had them down in Turkey eventually. So the world was divided between the Soviet Empire, which was led by the Soviet Union, and the Sino-Soviet bloc in Asia, which was Mao Zedong's China, allied with the Soviet Union, and they overran Southeast Asia. This was extraordinary. They had bases in Cuba. They were trying to build bases in Nicaragua. They had Grenada. They had Angola. They had Mozambique. They got Ethiopia. It was a worldwide struggle. And this country stood strong and stood tough under leaders like Eisenhower and like Ronald Reagan. And we just held the line and avoided a major war with Russia. We came close a number of times. And so eventually, when I was in the White House, or right after I left the White House, suddenly you looked up and the Soviet Empire collapsed. They were tearing down the Berlin Wall. People were pouring out of Eastern Europe into the West. People in the West were walking across the border into these countries. All of them overthrew their communist governments. So you got 10 countries coming free. Then you saw the USSR, the Soviet Union, broke up into 15 separate nations. 15 nations. It came apart. And you got Ronald Reagan walking through Red Square, the fellow that called the Soviets the evil empire. 7 years later, he's walking through Red Square and being patted on the back by Russians. The war was over. The West had won. America had led the West to victory. But when the war is over, we should have brought the troops home.
Okay, but now Pat, TV is saying, and very quickly, we have about a minute and a half before we have to take this break, but TV is saying, yeah, but you know, Yeltsin, he was drunk and he was a pushover and this kind of thing, but this Putin, if he's not a new Stalin, he's a new Mussolini or something, and he's hardcore, man, and he wants to rebuild the Soviet Empire with this new Eurasian Union. Is that nothing?
No, but he does want a Eurasian Union, and what he wants is his version of NAFTA, Canada, the United States, and Mexico, and the EU's got its economic union, and in you've got the Asian Economic Union. He wants to build an economic union of several of the old republics of the Soviet Union, but it is a voluntary union. It is an economic union. It is not a military alliance at all. NATO, quite frankly, which has 28 nations in it. We brought all those states of Eastern Europe into NATO. NATO is a military alliance. His Eurasian Union is an economic alliance. It's just like all these other groups that have gathered together in the post-Cold War era. They got them down Mercosur. They got one in Latin America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I read Peter Beinart in The Atlantic has a very interesting piece out yesterday where, no, it's not American weakness that led to this, he writes, but he has a very detailed history about NATO expansion and talks, even about I forget the exact name for him, Pat, forgive me, but there's something like, NATO stand councils where they actually are normalizing the military forces of even all the stands along NATO lines, even though they're not outright allies yet. That's even further than I understood it.
Future war, if you bring those states into NATO. For what is the purpose of NATO?
Right.
It's to contain
the
USSR. Russia.
All right, I'm sorry. I got to stop you there. We got to take this break. We'll be right back with the great Pat Buchanan right after this, everybody. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for cashintocoins.com. So you want to buy some Bitcoins? Cashintocoins.com makes it fast, easy, and safe to get Bitcoins. Just deposit the money into their account at any of the major banks they support, and then just email them a picture of the receipt and your Bitcoin address, and you get your Bitcoins. Almost always the same day it clears. In a tough, competitive new market, cashintocoins.com has the advantage. A great system and great customer service to keep you coming back. That's cashintocoins.com. Just click the link in the right margin at scotthorton.org. All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. It's the Scott Horton Show. I'm him. ScottHorton.org is the website, and you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at /Scott Horton Show. We're talking with Pat Buchanan, syndicated columnist. You can find him at antiwar.com, original.antiwar.com/Buchanan actually is the new address. In fact, I think antiwar.com/Pat will forward you on there. Tune out the war party, he writes, and Ukraine's crisis, not ours. Now, Pat, is that really true that it's not our crisis? What can you tell us about American intervention leading up to, for example, I guess, according to TV news, history began when the first Russian troops started coming across and landing in Crimea or leaving their bases in Crimea. What happened before that, or does it matter?
Well, what happened before that is is that they had a negotiation between Mr. Putin's economic union, the Eurasian Union or whatever he calls it, and the EU were both bidding to have Ukraine join them or move in their direction. Now, the European Union came in with a very cheesy offer. It was have the IMF come in and impose austerity, give them some loans, but give them no guarantee they are going to become a member of the European Union with all its benefits. So Putin sat down at the table and offered Kiev $15 billion in loans and concessionary terms on all their oil and gas. And so Yanukovych said, in effect, we got to go to the Russian offer. And Yanukovych is, of course, from eastern Ukraine, which is very pro-Russia. And so Putin won the battle, and what he saw then was the winning stakes were stolen from him. How? Groups came in first to protest the decision. They were from western and central Ukraine. Secondly, they've set up barricades, and then they brought in equipment to food and the rest of it. And then they began to battle police with sticks and then with Molotov cocktails. And then they burned down some buildings and occupied other public buildings and demanded concessions from Yanukovych, the president, who made one concession after another. He offered to bring the opposition into his government, and they kept pushing him till finally he broke, and they cut a deal, and it was not honored by the people in the streets, and Yanukovych he fled to Russia, and then the victors in that revolution went into the parliament, impeached him, and then they said Russian is no longer a second language. Now you're sitting up there in Moscow. What do you think when you see something like this going on? You're saying the West is behind this, the Americans with their National Endowment for Democracy, and all those agents they bring in here for these color-coded revolutions. They have to be behind this. And my guess is, Scott, now this is where you get into conjecture, my guess is he said, look, politically and diplomatically, we've temporarily lost the Ukraine, but we could lose our naval base and our strategic position in the Black Sea. Why don't we just secure it? And so send in these groups and do it in as non-obvious or non-provocative a way as we can, even though you can't really do that. Don't have them have any insignias on them, but take over all the quipos, grab the airfield so the Ukrainians can't land troops here, and simply take these places over. And that's what he did. And then we'll negotiate from a position of strength. That's what I think he did.
Yeah, it's funny how it seemed like the biggest piece of the coup was in broad daylight in all the papers, but it was in few places that anyone really put the cause and effect together, that it was the threat of sanctions against virtually, I guess, all of the billionaires, certainly any of the oligarchs of Ukraine who are supporting Yanukovych, that, listen, we're going to seize all of y'all's bank accounts. You better forsake this guy, 1-2. And they did. It wasn't the hippies, and they had the help of the brown shirts in the streets, I think, but it wasn't the hippies protesting out there that did this regime change. It was the threat of sanctions by the Western powers, pretty much 1-2, right?
Well, that's certainly involved in it. And and also, I'm not sure Mrs. Newland was right down there in the barricades, as of course with John McCain. And is this not direct interference in the internal affairs of Ukraine, trying to affect the overthrow of a legitimately elected government? The aura of hypocrisy around some American actions in recent years is astonishing. It's like the Cairo when the military took over, and they threw out the elected president of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Mohammed Morsi. John Kerry said all they were doing was restoring democracy. I think Putin looks at this and he said, who are these guys think they're kidding?
Yeah, it's funny. The whole world was laughing at all of Kerry's statements about, hey, look, you don't just go around regime changing people. And just, it was 7 billion people laughing at once. It hurt my ears.
You wonder why Putin says we went into Crimea because we suspect they've got weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah. By the way, you're the master of all this history, so I bet you that you know the answer to who are these Banderists? Does it matter the history of Bandera or however you say it?
Stefan Bandera?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Stefan Bandera, this is interesting. Initially when the Germans attacked the Soviet Union in June of 1941. They went late because they had to clean up something in the Balkans that Mussolini got him in trouble with. But they went late, and they swept into the Ukraine and in Russia, and they made enormous gains. And in the Baltic republics, which had been taken over by Stalin 2 years earlier, and when he was in alliance with Hitler, the people had been brutalized and murdered, and these very Catholic and Protestant countries, enormous suffering and murders. And that's why initially some of the Baltic peoples and the Ukrainians welcomed the Germans with open arms. But the Germans were deeply racist, and after a brief period of time, they found out that we've traded one ruler for another who is equally evil. But the Bandera and these folks fought on the side of the Germans, just like the Vlasov army did. He was a Vlasov. You'll Google that name, and you'll find out the Soviets genuinely detest him. He led something like 2 million Russian prisoners of war against Stalin. Mm-hmm. He had been a hero of the Soviet Union.
Well, and then was betrayed by Truman, right?
Pardon?
And then was betrayed by Truman, right?
Oh, yeah. What we did is take a look at, Operation Keelhaul, mm-hmm. and there's another term for it as well, but Operation Keelhaul, we sent not only the Russian prisoners of war back to Stalin in certain death and brutalization, but even Cossacks and others who have fled Stalin had no role in the war. It's one of the great crimes of American history, and it's been obviously it's been swept under the rug in the quote good war. But that was horrible, and then in the end of the war, many of the peoples of many of the Germans especially, you had the greatest ethnic cleansing in history. 12 to 15 million Germans, from Prussia and from Brandenburg and from the Sudetenland, Bohemia, Moravia. All these people just herded out of there, and several million died. It was a horrendous thing. But to be honest, Scott, when you take a look at what's going on right now, this is tinker toys compared to what went on back in the 1940s.
Sure. Well, you can see, though, why the lines are so hard. I mean, you see how hard people fight over Republicans and Democrats here and call each other names like Nazi and commie, but over there they actually have these legacies. Their political parties actually do come from people who, for one reason or another, for one time or another, sided with the totalitarians.
Right, and there's a part of me that deeply sympathizes with the Ukrainians who dumped their government over. It's not that he was corrupt and the rest of it, but if they want to be free of Russian control, and they would like to be part of Central and Western Europe, and they would really like to say goodbye to the Russians. I mean, I can understand that. The point I make is, look, this is not America's war. This is not our, struggle. This is not our battle. I mean, one of Barack Obama's better lines was in Syria when he finally said, look, we're not going to get ourselves involved in somebody else's civil war.
Right. Well, what do you think is behind this push? Because, I mean, he was the one, or at least it's his government, that has gotten us involved in this, as you said, all of Newland's intervention and all of that kind of thing. So is it just the pipelines, or is it just that they're obsessed with Russia and they just want to dismember it, like Gates says Dick Cheney always wanted to just completely destroy Russia down to break it into little pieces? Or what is it about that they are so interested in this land so far from home?
I separate President Obama from a number of the others. I don't think President Obama wants a confrontation with Russia. I think he wanted a genuine reset. I think he wanted to work with Putin. Look, Putin he's an elected president, but he's an autocratic ruler. He's a very tough customer. He's a Russian nationalist. He is really, its validity, some people may question, but he clearly is trying to reestablish the Orthodox Church to find some kind of new basis for law and morality in Russia, because the communism just eradicated everything. And now communism itself has been rejected and repudiated by all the people, I think, over there, almost all of them. But you got to replace it with something. But I'll tell you, one of the things is there's a Russophobia in this town and an anti-Putin attitude, which I find it's just reflexively hostile almost. and seizing upon anything he does. Look, the Chinese are much more in terms of, I think, of human rights and political freedoms and freedom of the press and the rest of it. I mean, Russia is not as bad as China. You would not get away with some of the things they're doing in Russia. You would not get away with those in China or in Saudi Arabia. So I think that there's a genuine hostility here, and I think there's a real desire on the part of some people really to get back to the Cold War. They were happy in that kind of division, back and forth, going to conferences and, moving chess pieces around the board and all the rest of it. I mean, they've missed it.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, at this point, do you think, I don't know if you saw the latest headline is that Hillary Clinton, at least she's not officially in government now, but she didn't outright call Putin Hitler, but she compared him to Hitler, and Ukraine to Czechoslovakia, I guess. Do you think, are things just going to keep getting dumber and worse from here, or they can smooth things over now?
I wrote a book about that whole called Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost 500 pages, and it goes all the way back to getting into World War I. And frankly, there's a chapter on what happened to Czechoslovakia and what are the origins of that. I don't want to get into it right now, but that thing was a disaster waiting to happen, and the disaster was created at Versailles. You knew that thing was going to come apart, putting the Czechs in control of all those Germans and Slovaks and Hungarians and Poles and Ruthenians, and none of whom wanted to be under Prague. But that's, this is the point here is that there's no doubt that, Hillary, you really ought not to use the Hitler analogy, because all of a sudden we're into, who's the most evil man in all of history. But there's no doubt that ethnicity and tribe and nationality, these to me are the most powerful forces now in the world, and they're beginning to tear apart these transnational institutions, the UN, the EU, all the rest of it, and countries. Take a look at Scotland wants to break away from England, Catalonia wants to break away from Spain, the Western Ukraine would like to break away from the East Ukraine, the Crimea would like to break away from Ukraine altogether and go with Russia. All of these things. Look at the battle over Georgia. It was over Ossetia and Abkhazia. These are two small units that when Georgia broke away from the Soviet Union and from Russia, they broke away from Georgia. They said, we don't want any part of you. But this, and what I think the statesmen of the coming century are going to be people who find a way to accommodate all these forces without the kinds of terrible wars they almost inevitably bring. Scott, you take a look at India today. The BJP, this Hindu nationalist party, is rising toward power, and the Muslims, who I think number something like 170 million in India, they're going to be unhappy with a lot of things that are done, I think. And so all of these religion, culture, tribe, ethnicity, and race, these are the forces that are really pulling the world apart.
Right, because all those borders are in the wrong places, according to the things you just described there.
And I think it was H.G. Wells who wrote, and it's in my book, about, I think it was entitled The Natural Borders of the World. And they should be based upon, I think, language and ethnicity and nationality and peoplehood and culture and faith. And people who believe this is how nations form. And I think these, as I say, people are moving back toward these things. And as they do, they tend to separate from those who are their neighbors. Look at the Kurds. They're carving out their own nation out of Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria. Now, I think I'm all for it, but there's no doubt we can't give them a war guarantee, because that's going to be a problem for all four of those nations going down the road.
Right. Yeah, well, and we sure, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the commentator, investment advisor Richard Mayberry, but he says, in the West, really no matter where you're from, if you're willing to cooperate with our system of limited law and property rights and that kind of thing, you can fit in here one way or the other. But in the old world, he calls it Chaos Stan, where all the lines are in the wrong places again, and where the easiest method of resolving disputes between individuals and factions, and that is property rights and law. Without those things there, it's just one crisis after another, and it always will be. Maybe in 50 years, I think Mayberry actually predicts that one way or the other, America, intervening or not, Russia will eventually break up, because there are all kind of tiny little nations within Russia that most of us have never even heard of before. But they're there.
Right. Now look at the battle going on, not only in Chechnya to break away, but in Dagestan and Ingushetia. Both of them, they've got battles going on there. And I've read of other ones out in Central Asia, where these little enclaves want their own identity. Just like we mentioned, there's North Ossetia, South Ossetia, Abkhazia, and they're right bordering there on Georgia, and they want their own nationhood. But it can be done peacefully. Look what happened when Czechoslovakia broke apart in 1939 in March. I mean, the British gave a war guarantee to the Polish colonels they should never have given. But look what happened to Czechoslovakia. When was it? Just recently. I'm not sure if it was in the 90s. But Slovakia said we'd like to secede and set up our own country, and it was done peacefully.
I think it was in 91. I think it was before the end of 91. They were done.
And then, of course, look at Yugoslavia. Part of that was bloody, but Slovenia had to fight only 10 days, and they were gone. See, Slovenia and Croatia come out of the Habsburg Empire, and Serbia and some of the other places there were part of the Ottoman Empire. And you got that dividing line all the way through there. And so some are Catholic and some are Orthodox, and some look one way and some look another. And especially, of course, we had that horrible atrocities in World War II in the Balkan Peninsula, Serbs and Croats. And that explains the barbarity of the war they fought and the continued animosities there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and of course, the American government will always be able to find something to point at as an excuse to intervene in the rest of the world forever. If the only criteria is that something bad is happening, then they have plenty to do.
But, the American people are on, some things are very hopeful. When Obama was there, talking, they were going to, I think Kerry was using the Hitler analogies back last summer. And Obama was all set to go and bomb or missile strikes on missile and bombing attacks on Syria. And the American people rose up and said, look, don't take us into that mess. And so Obama said, I've got to get authorization from Congress. So he ran for cover. And Congress was hit with all manner of phone calls and letters and wires and everything. It was coming in 100 to 1. Don't get us into that mess. And he didn't. So I think the American people have a real ability, if now, if they will just speak up and say, keep us out of the Crimean Peninsula. We don't have a light brigade.
Right. Yeah, another Crimean War. It's so far from our. And now, and I'm sorry because we're way over time, and I'll let you go if you got to go. But I wanted to ask you just at the end here, as the rhetoric keeps increasing up until now, it seems like we're going to sanction you this, and we're going to kick you out of our co-NATO council that, and all of these things. Do you think this can be smoothed over pretty easily? You think it's much likely to, or it's very likely to get worse?
I think the reason is, you're talking about. They're going to put all these sanctions on Russia. We're going to sink their banks. You sink their banks, and they've got interbank relationships, and you'll pull down some others with it. And what do you do if, for example, Russia says, okay, you're sinking our banks. We're calling in our loans from Ukraine. We're going to charge them the full world price for oil and gas. We're not going to take any more of their exports, and we take more than anybody like that. And we're going to shut down the $15 billion we were lending them, and we're going to ask back the $2 billion we've already given them, or $4 billion we've already given them. That will leave us with a basket case nation the size of France and more populous than 4 of Greece. Do we really want that? I mean, you start this economic war, and it's the backlash comes immediately. You saw what happened in the stock market. The Dow Jones was down 200 on Monday, I think it was, and on Tuesday it came roaring back and it looked like peace was breaking out.
Yeah. Well, I guess they succeeded. They didn't get Crimea invaded when they did the color-coded revolution of the Orange Revolution of 2004 there, and against the very same guy, right? Yanukovych.
Well, yeah, they threw him out then, and the Russians took it, and they waited 6 years, and they won the election when Yulia Tymoshenko, she's the gas princess, for heaven's sakes. And, there was corruption all through there, and there is corruption all through there, and it is awful, but that's exactly right. And you know what, really, I'm surprised that American journalists don't investigate all this money that the U.S. under the table moves into all these areas where we're preaching democracy and we're working under the table to buy elections, basically.
Right. There's a clip, and it's kind of mysterious to me, actually. It's Victoria Nuland speaking with a big Chevron banner behind her to important people only, I think, in the room. It doesn't look like it's the official video of the event or anything, but I don't know if it's supposed to be an expose type of a leak either. But she's talking about how the U.S. government, has funneled $5 billion into Ukraine to support pro-democracy organizations, you understand? But I don't know the time frame there, Pat. Do you have a good guess at the time frame she's talking about? $5 billion?
That is an enormous amount of money into the politics of $5 billion. You could probably come close to. I wish I had that when I was running for president.
Yeah, you'd think that they'd have had this coup last November.
I can't believe that's an accurate figure, but why are the press not digging out this? I'll tell you, my guess is they probably got a lot of sources in these places.
Yeah, well, and, they're pretty lazy. They don't really want to learn much more than the party line because they got to go on in a few minutes, most of these TV news people.
Well, some of those do, but there's still some good journalists out there, I think, on these newspapers and also on the web. I read a lot of things I find very impressive on the web and a lot of websites, but I wonder why they just don't run down where they're putting all this. It reminds me of the old Comintern that the Soviets had, which was responsible for dumping over democratic countries and making them vote communist. And we just do we say it's fine for us to do it because we want them to reorient to the West. But those are Cold War institutions.
Right. Yeah, it is. It's it is kind of a reversal there, not just of right and left, but also of just, the global democratic revolution. That's what makes it okay, is it has that democratic in there. But it is, in a way, it's the domino theory with us as the Reds. And then once we spread democracy to this country, it's going to help catch on in the next country and the next country, too.
Yeah, who was that fellow that wrote the book, The End of History and the Last Man, that the inevitability of the democratic revolution worldwide? It seems some of our friends in Washington want to hurry it along a bit.
Right. Yeah, I agreed with your column back in 2004 that that's it. Fallujah's the high tide of the empire, but I don't think the rest of them got the memo, Pat.
Well, I think they did. Look, are we in Fallujah now? No.
No. Yeah, well, they left there, but they don't seem like they're done yet.
Well, look, there's no doubt that there are people who would like to be still in there, but, Scott, there are some reasons to be optimistic here. We are out of Iraq, and it was a horrible situation, and awful lot of these guys, these wounded warriors, we see them on TV. We're coming out of Afghanistan. The stupid thing in Libya, that is over and done with, but we did not get involved in Syria. The American people rose up. The American people, as you say, are expressing themselves to stay out of Crimea. I think President Obama and the American military, they're not anxious to fight the Russians and in Georgia or somewhere.
Right. Yeah, that's right. I think Dempsey helped. It wasn't just the American people. It was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff really told Obama what was what about Syria. So that's a pretty good coalition, the American people and the military against war. Maybe we can keep the eggheads in check together.
Well, they keep, and they're more and more visible, yowling for this and yowling for that. With due respect to my former Republican colleague, John McCain, what he's been for the last 4 wars that didn't happen.
Yeah, well, and the 4 that did,
we're all Georgians now, and why aren't we moving into Syria? And we ought to send them, bring Georgia and Ukraine into NATO and all the rest of it.
Right. All right.
Listen, Scott, I've got to get going, my friend.
I know. I was going to say I've kept you way, way over time here, but thank you very much for your time on the show today, Pat. I really appreciate it.
Okay, you take it easy.
All right. Everybody, that is the great Pat Buchanan. You can find what he writes at antiwar.com/Pat. Well, it'll forward you on there. And the latest 2 are Ukraine's Crisis, Not Ours, and Tune Out the War Party. Hey, Al Scott Horton here for The Future of Freedom, the monthly journal of the Future Freedom Foundation at fff.org/subscribe. Since 1989, FFF has been pushing an uncompromising moral and economic case for peace, individual liberty, and free markets. Sign up now for The Future Freedom, featuring founder and president Jacob Hornberger, as well as Sheldon Richmond, James Bovard, Anthony Gregory, Wendy McElroy, and many more. It's just $25 a year for the print edition, $15 per year to read it online. That's fff.org/subscribe. And tell them Scott sent you. Man, you need some new stickers for the back of your truck. Scott Horton here for LibertyStickers.com. Aren't you sick and tired of everyone else being wrong about everything all the time? Well, now you can tell them all what's right with some stickers from LibertyStickers.com. At LibertyStickers.com, they're against everything, so you know they're good on your issue, too. Whether it's the wars, police, state, gun laws, the left and right, or the president, LibertyStickers.com has hundreds of choices so you can find just the right words to express your opposition and contempt for those who would violate your rights. That's LibertyStickers.com. Everyone else's stickers suck. Hey, Al Sky here. First, I want to take a second to thank all the show's listeners, sponsors, and supporters for helping make this show what it is. I literally couldn't do it without you. And now I want to tell you about the newest way to help support the show. Whenever you shop at Amazon.com, stop by ScottHorton.org first, and just click the Amazon logo on the right side of the page. That way, the show will get a kickback from Amazon's end of the sale. It won't cost you an extra cent. And it's not just books. Amazon.com sells just about everything in the world, except cars, I think. So whatever you need, they've got it. Just click the Amazon logo on the right side of the page at ScottHorton.org, or go to ScottHorton.org/Amazon. Hey, Al Scott Horton here to tell you about this great new project, Listen and Think Audio at listenandthink.com. They've got 2 new audiobooks read by the deepest voice in libertarianism, the great historian Jeff Riggenbach. Our Last Hope, Rediscovering the Lost Path to Liberty by Michael Maharrey of the 10th Amendment Center is available now. And Beyond Democracy, co-authored by Frank Karsten of the Mises Institute Netherlands and journalist Carl Beckman, will be released this month. And they're only just getting started. So check out listenandthink.com. You may be able to get your first audiobook absolutely free. That's Listen and Think Audio at listenandthink.com.